When people talk about what does it mean to be well, I will often ask them, who are you inside of this?
Welcome, everyone, to the Autoimmune Hour. I'm Sharon Sayler from SharonSayler.com, and of course, from UnderstandingAutoimmune.com, where you can find over 460 plus episodes of the show. And we're continuing to go strong. We started the show in January of 2015, and here we are in January 2024, and still finding great information and finding great people to share with us. So, everyone in our community, thanks for being with us through this entire journey and look forward to many, many more years together. And tonight we have Dr. Charryse Johnson back. You'll remember she's from the book Inspired, Expired Mindsets. Sorry about that. I guess we could be inspired to work on our
That's what I
expired
was thinking.
mindset.
Yes.
Well, and you guys might remember that she's a veteran psychotherapist and an award-winning speaker and author of #1 best-selling book, Expired Mindsets, as I said. And she's got a new book out. And let me read the title, just get it correct. Get Off the Scale and Heal. I love it. It's a great book. It's really not a weight loss book, okay, guys? But we're going to talk about that because many people struggle with this, with the pressure to conform to certain stereotypes and ideals and limits. And it really come to the forefront during the holidays. And then at the new year, everybody piles into the gym and all of that. So we're going to talk about this great book that's all about self-love and empowering ourselves and breaking free from external judgments. Welcome back, Dr. Charryse. It's so wonderful to see you again.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. And I loved your reaction about the book because if I'm honest, I totally did that on purpose, right? I totally made it to where people would go, wait a minute, is this person who is all about body positivity talking about losing weight? Absolutely not. But I know that that's on the mind of a lot of people. So I'm like, let's get into it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's get into it because the one thing that pops up into my head now is through the holidays, and I have to raise my hand. The first thing you do is look at the scale. And, oh, I shouldn't have had that, my great grandma's cookies or whatever,
Yeah.
and still start down that whole road. I should have. Why did I? So let's talk about some of the ways we first self-sabotage ourselves, and then we can go to the external environment too.
Ultimately, the focus of having a healthy relationship with our body means that we give ourselves permission to have grandma's cookies or that pumpkin pie, that sweet potato pie, whatever it is that you had any time of year, and you don't beat yourself up over it, right? The focus is trying not to self sabotage by placing morality around food. We sometimes have grown up in seasons or cultures or even families that made us believe that a good day was parallel to how good you ate and a bad day was parallel to how bad you ate. And that self sabotages our ability to be in a good relationship with food and to be a good relationship with ourselves.
I'm thinking that so many families, and I raise my hand with mine included, a lot of our interactions are around food, whether it's a Sunday meal at a special
Mm,
aunt's house every Sunday or
yeah.
whatever it is. A lot of our social interactions are overeating.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's about how you move through those interactions. For example, are you able to go to those social interactions and still stay aligned with what works well for your body? Many of the listeners may have or know others that have autoimmune challenges. So when we show up in those environments, are we able to continue to be in those social eating places and moments and still know this is what's great for my body? Or are we abandoning the body in those moments? So, social eating is not bad, but it's what we are navigating when we're making choices. And then, how are we talking to ourselves after we get out of those environments?
It's a great tip there. And one of the things that came to mind for me is I do have certain foods that I choose to stay away from because I don't like how I feel the next day. The
Mhm.
inflammation, whatever is flared. And setting boundaries is really hard, especially with family members.
Yeah.
Oh, one bite won't hurt.
Yeah.
So, what are some tips? I know it's a little late for some of you already had the holidays. Going into the new year, let's set a positive tone here. What are some tips for setting great boundaries around food?
Sure, because even though we're springboarding it with talking about the holidays, boundaries with food and with people is something that is useful, whether you're at something with family or you're at a work event, it can be anywhere. So, one, I think it's important for you to know what you believe about what your body needs. Boundaries have to start with us being willing to see those boundaries not as punishment, but see them as a way to support us. Because you said, for example, there are things that you choose not to eat because you don't like how they feel. So I think number one, know what you believe. And two, create boundaries that you feel support your goals for your health. So then we see them as something valuable versus something that is hurting other people. Number three, and I don't want to give too many because it can be overwhelming, is I encourage people to practice their script for how they communicate those boundaries in advance. So that means if you know you're someone that chooses not to have gluten because of its inflammation for your particular body, but people will often go, you can just have a bite. I only used a little gluten. I've heard that before, as if you can only use a little.
If you
Knowing
even
what
know what gluten is.
I know, if you even know what gluten is, which is so funny, and I have celiac, so I'm like, okay, a little is too much. But it's being able to know what you want to say in advance, because a lot of times setting boundaries is difficult because we have no idea how we want to communicate it or we're not comfortable. So I honestly believe it's important to know what you want to say and stand in the mirror and practice communicating that, and then know how do you want to tweak it a little bit when if it's with a grandma or great aunt or a colleague, and that will help boost your confidence.
Oh, and one of those suggestions when we're practicing in front of the mirror is continue to breathe. I
Mhm.
notice when I'm going into a stressful conversation, I have to remind myself, okay, take a
Yeah.
couple of deep breaths here. Let's get some oxygen to the brain.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a lot of anxiety around being seen and doing something different. What makes boundaries sometimes challenging is that if you're in a place and it feels like nobody else has boundaries, we can have a lot of thoughts and anxiety in our head. One other thing that I talk about in the book that it made me think of when you were talking about families and what we've learned is I talk about the Clean Plate Club and the origin of the Clean Plate Club and how some of us overextend our own personal and physical boundaries because we've been taught you need to finish everything on your plate or you need to finish everything that you've been given. And then we don't feel good afterwards. So I want people to think about boundaries in terms of the boundaries that they want to keep with themselves and the boundaries that they would love to communicate with other people so they can wake up the next day and feel great.
Oh, absolutely. And you made me flash back to my childhood. I remember the lecture about all the starving children. And it
Yeah.
wasn't just within my family. I'm thinking of girlfriends from that time. You'd have a meal at their house and it was the same script.
And the Clean Plate Club was created during wartime when food was scarce. But what we have to realize now is for most of us, not all, we're not in a season where food is scarce anymore. So it's okay for us to plate less so that if we do need to finish, we still feel satisfied. But also recognizing that, especially in Western culture, the portions that we're given often exceed what we can truly fit in our bodies.
And feel comfortable for sure. I know this is weight loss, but what I like to do is if there's a selection of plates on the table, I always take the smallest one. That way it looks like to others I have a whole plate of food.
I don't even consider that really the way you said it, a plate loss. You're creating a visual boundary in place that will keep other people away from the conversation. In truth, the size of the plates that we are intended to work off of are only 8 inches. We're often given 10 to 12-inch plates, even paper plates in a lot of settings. So that's actually a really smart boundary that could be helpful.
It's a nice visual that they think you're eating a lot.
Yeah, it is.
So I'm all about these kinds of ways of non-confrontational types of things. But I know the book isn't really about confrontation. I know it's about conforming to the social pressures. And I took some notes here. And one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is comparison and taking things in context. That was really stood out to me about this idea of how we are constantly comparing ourselves or letting other people compare us, and how taken out of context it can mean completely different things.
Sure. When we put ourselves in situations that we are comparing our body weight or shape or size or well being to another person's, it's extremely damaging. For example, if we're living with an autoimmune disorder, and typically we are more likely to have two if we have one, those present very unique challenges to our body. So if we are then comparing ourselves to someone that isn't living with an autoimmune and going, they're able to do this and I'm not. Why is this working for them and not for me? We really create a lot of shame and self-blame instead of compassion towards our body. When those things make us feel bad, we can feel like a failure or we can feel overwhelmed and want to give up on taking care of our health and feel like nothing ever works for me because we're so focused on what we look like instead of what we feel like. And that's really the focus of Get Off the Scale and Heal, is not to abandon your internal well-being for the sake of looking externally well. And that comes from thin privilege and all the messages that try to tell you what you're supposed to look like.
Oh boy, get caught in some algorithm sometime and just go down the rabbit holes and you begin to think of
Yeah.
all sorts of things like that and not realizing that may or may not work for your body. There's a
Yeah.
couple of algorithms I've gotten stuck in lately and I just cannot believe them. Like I'm worried that people will think, okay, if I'm not doing this or I'm not doing just that,
Mhm.
that something's wrong with me by the way the algorithms amplify, like this is the thing you should be doing.
Mhm.
This is
Yeah.
the way that you should be being. This is the way you should be looking.
Yeah.
I don't think that's helpful. To me, you don't ever know the context of where these people are coming from and how with social media and the external social things. And like I said, I got caught in these couple of these rabbit holes of algorithms. After a while, you're like, well, maybe I should try that. And then you stop and think a little more rationally. Yeah, that wouldn't work for me because,
And I also feel like when we get caught in those algorithms or all of the different messaging that's coming in from all of the things that we're looking at, it just adds a lot of confusion. Part of what's so important is for us to look at where's the confusion that was created because of our family of origin and all the different messages that we took in there, and how are we adding to that by looking and trying out too many different things to the point that we feel like, I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know what's true. And that's why it's so important to go back to tuning into your own body and taking action around what feels good for you.
wonderful, wonderful. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because it's also related to health and our weight and our well-being and our body shape, are the role that hormones play in
Mhm.
our life as well as the food. And you and I have chatted about this before, is our hormones change throughout our life. So if you started one way, you may not be that way later
Mhm.
on in life, and that's normal. Yet
Yeah.
too many people don't think that's normal.
Yeah, no, it's extremely normal. If you think about it, we have different certain times of our life where hormones change, whether that's through puberty, through adulthood, for those that can bear children, if you're going through the fertility process or pregnant, after perimenopause, menopause. And I want to add that males also have different hormonal shifts, or people that are even non-binary. And if they're taking hormone replacement, we all have hormones if we're human. Let's start there. And hormones play a significant factor in how our body metabolizes food, in whether or not our brain and our digestive system are in sync and give us the right messages around hunger, around satiety. And so that's why it's important to know that we really can't bulldoze our body. It's not just the diet industry's dynamic of less equals more, and if you eat less, this is going to happen, because there's a lot of different factors that control and impact appetite and weight. So it's important to look at all of those. And that's why I want people to not allow the numbers underneath their feet to tell the whole story. If you feel like, hey, I'm sleeping well, I'm hydrating, I'm moving my body, I'm eating to the best of my ability, and something doesn't feel right, that's when you want to seek out support of a professional instead of just thinking, let me keep reducing myself down because I'm trying to meet a certain goal.
Absolutely. Now, two things came up for me, and one of them that I want to speak to first is oftentimes with autoimmune, there
Mhm,
are food sensitivities, but the
mhm,
one problem I see happening, and I know it's not directly addressed in your book, but it's very
mhm.
tangential to it, is oftentimes whether you have one or more authority, shall I say, in your life, they'll say you're sensitive and take out. And I've heard people take out dairy, eggs, nightshades, gluten, sugars, and pretty soon they're left with a handful of
Yeah,
foods,
yeah.
thinking that they're being healthy, but not realizing that they've been eating like 5 or 10 foods for a year or more.
And when you reduce yourself down based on your own information instead of qualified information, you're also then eliminating a lot of nutrients you need. And that will then impact sleep, impact mind health, impact gut health, impact hormones. So, a couple of things that I will often encourage if people are feeling frustrated and trying to figure out what to do, meet with a licensed dietitian and talk to them about various food sensitivity testing that can be done so that they get a more accurate read using either their saliva or blood work. And then they'll get information that says, here's what we know about your body versus you sifted through the internet and found this information and you want to see if it works because we're not one size fits all. And then they can walk with you through the process of do you need to make some changes and take things out? But if you take this out and this has vitamin K in it and vitamin D, then here's some other foods that we want to make sure you add so that you have good comprehensive health. So I think a lot of people get to that situation because they're really looking to feel better, but it can be very dangerous. And then they can end up in a situation where they've reduced their foods down so small that their body is not in a healthy place, and then sometimes they end up with me because one of my specialties is eating disorders. And I've had a lot of individuals get there because they became over focused or hyper focused on trying to find that perfect way of eating. And then they weren't eating enough.
Right. Or so much of one thing that it was affecting their health in an opposite
Yeah.
direction. That's where we have the conversation about a licensed dietitian and
Yeah.
and nutritionist to help
Yeah.
you understand that that's not healthy.
Influencers, Google, and TikTok are really not trained and qualified to give you that kind of information. It's important for us to go to licensed professionals who can be there with you and help you stay healthy through the frustration.
Absolutely. And even if it's good advice, like there's certain people with all the qualifications on social media and it's really great advice, but is it great advice for you?
Yeah,
They don't take into account, it's a very generalized, they don't take into account your genetics, your prior health history, your
yeah,
time of life. And
yeah.
so it's important that we get very selective on that. Now, I took a bunch of notes.
Okay, let's do it. I'm good with it.
I wanted to ask your question. What does it mean to be well?
I'm a proponent of live well, love well, and play well. I think it's a very simple way of asking yourself, what does that mean for you? But am I living well? Am I loving well, loving myself and others? And playing well means, am I finding time to do things that bring joy? But that's a question that everyone has to answer for themselves and really go, is the definition that you have for that based on what you want or also based on what you believe you're supposed to do? Because I think we always have, going back to the expired mindsets, the part of us that can be trying to live up to a picture of wellness that really doesn't match who we are. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a lot of this has to go back to getting clear on who we are.
Mhm.
How much are we letting other things give us ideas of we are not enough or whatever that is? I'm going to go tangential here because she has this wonderful set of affirmation cards that goes along with the book.
Mhm.
And to me, I saw that as a wonderful way of keeping us on the right path day in and day out, creating a habit of looking at those affirmations. Do you? For those
Yeah.
on the video, do you have them there? You could show
Yeah,
us.
I have them right here. So they're in this little sacket that you can, if you come to something that I do around the world live, you can get them physically, and then they're also digitally on Amazon. But I wanted to create these because it was important for me to give people something that when they close the book, they could very quickly still embrace the concept. So this one says, every small shift I make is a sign of my commitment to myself, right? And really helping us acknowledge those small or large wins. There's another one that says, my needs are not a burden. That goes back to when we're trying to think about the boundaries that we want to communicate, or maybe even the things that we feel about ourselves. It takes us not feeling like a burden in order to make ourselves a priority. This one says the number on the scale is not a complete picture of my health. This might be one of my favorites. And it gives us a chance to go, health is a very broad factor. And we want to look at your metabolic health. We want to look at your relational health. We want to look at your financial health. But the numbers beneath your feet really are a very small piece of data. So these are great to have, to put on your refrigerator, to put on your mirror, to put in your car, your purse, your wallet, wherever you want them, so that you're reminded and just really downloading a new message for yourself.
And I like to play with them. I'll put in air quotes tarot cards. I want you to
Like
choose the fifth one down.
the fifth one down. All right, let's do it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Fifth one down. Oh, says I can love myself even when others don't.
Oh, wow. That's a good one.
Yes. So they're not all centered towards body and weight. They're all centered around different things, around some around food. But like this last one says, I deserve to be seen without judgment. So they
Ooh.
really cover a lot of different pieces that center on what it means to be well.
Oh, wow. Absolutely. Now, one of the things I wanted to also talk about is that it's not always just food. I know I've shared this story with you, Dr. Charryse, and I've shared it on the show before, but I think it's important. I went in for a 5-year checkup with my rheumatologist, and I was doing great. That place of remission. And I love that when they say, now you're not healed. But that's another story where they kind of remind you that. So, anyway, the word's remission for rheumatologists. And going great, except my sleep. And I
Mhm.
was telling her that all about what was going on with my sleep, that it was difficult to sleep through the night. And it was a great reframe for me. And this is where I'm going with the stories. This idea of context and reframing is she paused for what seemed like a long time. And she goes, Sharon, that could be menopause too. We have to look
Mhm.
beyond just the autoimmune.
Mhm.
And I was like, wow, that is so helpful. I've carried that story with me because I can take that same concept of look beyond what seems to be the problem, the number on the scale, and take it like, could it be from something else?
Yeah. And that's why we want to have a good picture of what does it mean to be well? So that when this area feels like it's not lining up with the way that we want, we're able to go to someone else, or we're able to look at other areas of our life and go, am I seeing this issue in other ways? And it creates clues. I think it's important for us to stay curious about our health and about how we're feeling so that we see it as something that we're constantly working to support, because I do think it's very easy to eliminate all the other factors. There's menopause, but there's also stress. Like, we don't realize how much stress impacts our health and can impact our weight as well.
And it took me a long time to realize when I was under stress. I
Mhm.
feel like a big part of my life has been stressed. And so somehow I normalized that that was normal.
Yeah. And not only normalizing that, oh, I've always felt this way, we don't always consider there's something called accumulative stress, which means maybe the stress that I'm under has been the same for 20 years. Let's hope not. But how my body and my mind responded to it 20 years ago is going to be very different than how it responds to it now. I give people the analogy of think about a pair of shoes when they're new and they're fresh and the soles of them are great, but over time they get worn down so they can't handle the same amount of pressure, and the surfaces that they once did, we're the same way, and how we handle our stress is very similar.
Mm, that's important to know. And then
Mhm.
you have some tips on how we can know or visualize and create, manifest what we want. Okay, so I'm noticing that my shoes are a little worn down, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Where do I find my inner cobbler to
Oh, I
to
love that inner cobbler.
to repair these?
Yeah, so when you find yourself in a place that you're like, "Okay, I'm feeling worn down," it's important to first identify what's no longer bringing you joy. Right? Even things that you've always done. Then you want to think about, I love the concept of recalibrating. So I've identified here all the things that really aren't bringing me joy, or they're not serving the same amount of purpose that they once did in my life, because I need to be able to tangibly point to those things. Then recalibration is this process of, I need to realign, I need to adjust my perspective. I need to adjust my expectations of myself and my expectations of other people. I actually want to stop there, because even though those two things sound simple, that's a lot of work to first be willing to say, here's things that I'm doing that I've always done, but it really doesn't bring me joy anymore. Do I have the courage to change it? What's no longer serving me? Where do I need to stop giving so much because it's taking too much away from me? And then where is it time for me to shift perspective and expectations on myself and on other people, so that I'm not navigating and managing disappointment? And then once you go through those different steps, and they're like a circle versus a step one, two, three, they're a cyclical process, then you add, where do I want to move forward? What do I want to approach? What do I want to bring in that I feel would bring me joy, or something that I used to do that I stopped doing for myself that I want to bring back and I want to reclaim? So you just look at, here's all the things on my plate. What needs to come off, and what do I want to put on my plate, so that when I look down, I like what I see again.
I love that. I have a tangential question
Sure.
about, since I don't live in a little bubble all by myself,
Mhm.
oftentimes there are certain places when I'm doing that process of yours where I'm looking out and going, how much am I projecting on other people of, and to really that I have to take control of it, or am I meddling or worrying too much about something I have no control over?
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
these external questions besides, or including
Mhm.
what makes me happy, what brings me joy, really asking those hard questions of, what part am I playing in this? How am I recreating some of the drama that I'm complaining about?
So even when you get to the point of asking yourself, what no longer serves me, that's not just about the things that we do. It might be about my attitude towards certain things. It might be, it's not serving me to be overly concerned about what's going on in the life of my child, because they're an adult and I don't have control over their decisions. But I'm putting so much emotional energy directed towards trying to manage a life situation that is actually theirs to manage. So I have to work on backing that away. So you really hit this great point of insight. We have to focus on the only thing that we have the ability to choose is our own response. And sometimes that means releasing the part of us that thinks, if then, if I do this, then this person will do what I want. If I do this, then this person may act the way that I want them to, because there are no guarantees.
Yeah, if this then that, that rarely
Mhm.
works, especially with other people.
Yeah.
And just a side note, the one thing nobody ever told me, and it seems so obvious, but I say having adult children is harder than small children.
Oh, that's a whole series within itself. There's so many books out there that talk about small children and teenagers. And why did we stop there? Because raising young adult and adult children is not for the faint. It's like having multiple households all at the same time. I have a 22 and a 24-year-old. I love them to pieces, but I do feel like I'm managing three different homes, all with different sets of rules. And there's a fine line between it all, for sure.
Exactly. I always say my same generational friends, it's like, it was so easy when they were 2, you just picked them up and said no. So,
Yeah, yeah,
and now a lot of times, as like I say, and even with my friends, sometimes you just have to be there to hold the space and grace for them and for
yeah,
yourself as you're going through
yeah.
these changes.
And reminding yourself that holding space doesn't mean that it's your responsibility to fix everything. Sometimes it's not your role to fix anything. Just be there. Let your power be in your presence, and then figure out, okay, now what do I need to do to leave this space and leave whatever was happening here? Because if I carry it with me, it's too much to carry, or it's not mine to carry.
I like both of those are true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not an or, and. How's an and?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And and on that note, I see when I get with Dr. Charisse, I blow through my commercial breaks. We need to take a quick commercial break because
Oh,
we're late in taking it, guys. So we'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to the Autoimmune Hour. Tonight, we're here with Dr. Charryse Johnson. She's the author of Expired Mindsets, which you guys can go back into the shows. I can't remember when we did have our wonderful chat, but we've got a great interview there on Expired Mindsets. And her new book, and I want to make sure I get the title right, Get Off the Scale and Heal. It's a beautiful book. You can find it online. And one of the things that you talk about in the book, besides what all we've talked about, boundaries and healthy eating and all these things, because it's not a weight loss book, for sure, guys. I think it would definitely help in
mhm,
weight loss, but it's
mhm.
not a weight loss book. One of the things you talk about in great length is about healing our self-image.
Yeah.
And so often, whether it's those algorithms I mentioned prior that you can get down in the rabbit hole and go, okay, how come I don't look like them? Or it's just a matter of aging. Coming to
Mm.
terms with my gray hair during the pandemic was fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, what are some things about healing our self-image if we find ourselves every morning carefully or scrupulously looking in the mirror? Oh no, another wrinkle.
Yeah. Yeah. Our image of ourself is a driving force for so much of what we say, think, and do. And so if we are managing a self-image that is battered or incongruent or in need of repair, then we're going to find ourselves then caught in loops of choices and relationships and decisions that we feel like this is how I want to be, but I'm not acting the way that I feel like really represents who I am. So going back and healing your self image is such a key part of getting to the root of even your eating choices, or looking at how you're using food to self soothe, or you're so attracted to that algorithm because you want people to believe a certain thing about who you are. There's this concept that we often hear, it'll be better when I'm thinner. If most of us, and I've said this, I think I might even say it in the book, if part of why we want to look a certain way is because we don't want people to see the things in us that we want to hide.
Oh, explain more. That is
Yeah.
fascinating.
So part of that ideal image that we have for ourselves is our image for us in all different ways. It's protective. If I look thin, if I look healthy, if I look strong, whatever that image is for you, then we believe I won't get hurt, or people will treat me the way that I want, or I will feel more confident. So we have this sometimes false reality around, if I look a certain way, then people won't see the things in me that I don't want them to see. And
Mm.
so that's how we can get in the place of incessantly abandoning ourselves and what we really are inside, because we're trying to be perceived a certain way.
I have a weird question about that, though.
Okay.
I'm totally fascinated by that. Yet it seems almost like a vicious cycle to me that whether it's being reinforced that, oh, you look great, you must have lost 5 pounds, and in your mind, yeah, I'm striving to lose 20,
Yeah.
or it seems like almost a vicious circle kind of behavior where it just self feeds itself, where we never get to that place of really knowing who I am, if it's all
And it,
external like that.
yeah, it can be a vicious cycle. And the goal is to step out of the cycle, right? The goal is, what does it look like to fully love and accept myself, regardless of my external nature? If no one ever says you look great because you lost 5 more pounds, if no one else ever notices the new thing that you did with your hair and it's those things are fine, what is it that you believe about yourself and where are you getting over validation or validation from something that, like you said, you would then have to constantly feed? When people talk about what does it mean to be well, I will often ask them, who are you in silence? Who are you when no one is there, when there are no applause, there are no achievements, when you're just left with yourself? Are you at peace? Are you content? Are you grateful? Are you good? That's a deep level of a healthy self-image that if nothing else about you changed, you would feel like, I am good with where I am. I'm grateful. I'm thankful for whatever level of health I do have. That doesn't mean I don't want to continue to work to improve my health, but getting off the vicious cycle means my self-image is not connected to productivity. It's not connected to what I look like. It's not connected or overly enmeshed with what other people think about me. Those things are nice, but they're not your core identity. And a lot of us have a very intertwined identity that is really hanging on the balance.
Okay, you got me hooked.
I
Let's talk
know.
about inner. You always do, Dr. Charisse. Because I bashed the social media here a little bit, but you do have to follow Dr. Charisse, especially on Instagram and YouTube. She's got some of the most interesting topics that she brings up, and you can tell she speaks straight from the heart and from her years and years of experience. Okay, so what if we're feeling like, okay, I am intermeshed? Maybe I have met numerous people in this journey, a wellness journey, who are intermeshed with their illness. What if
Yeah.
they are intermeshed with something, whether it's a dysfunctional family member or
Yeah.
whatever? What are some tips if we're like, okay, she's kind of like, I'm feeling a little
Yeah, you're like,
uncomfortable,
oh, that hurt a little bit. I
that was
have that.
close.
I've been told I have that effect on people. So first and foremost, anytime you have this epiphany about yourself, please be compassionate towards yourself and know that we don't ever set out to be enmeshed, right? We end up realizing things and then we're like, oh, yikes, that is, that's not great, right? So I think one, it's important to be compassionate with yourself. And then two, walk yourself through the process of, how do I think I got here? When did this start becoming something that I felt so connected around? And that's important because we do need to know, are we looking at something that is relatively new and situational, or are we looking at a generational pattern that has been in place and kind of passed down? Because that's going to be a little bit more difficult. And so that is something that you can do by making a simple timeline of your experiences with whatever person or situation that you feel like you've been enmeshed in. Then the next piece would be, who am I if this wasn't in place the way it was? So if I didn't have this enmeshment with my husband or my wife or my partner, who do I think I would be? And what do I fear? And I can like, I feel like I can feel people go, oh, this is so hard as I say those things. But before we can release something, we have to be willing to acknowledge how it's serving us. And once you can identify that need, oh, I'm so connected here because this makes me feel calm and helps me manage my anxiety when my children need me, then we can identify, okay, so what I need to work on is how to self-regulate and provide my own sense of calm and no longer hold them responsible for being that in my life because they're not always going to be here.
That's beautiful. And two things came up
Yeah.
for me. One was, I thought you were going to say, what do I feel? And instead you said, what do I fear?
Yeah.
That was powerful to stop and think about, what is it I fear? Now, in the case where you mentioned someone and enmeshed with their kids, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking like aloneness, or they don't need me, or all sorts of fears could come up
Yeah.
on that. And so what do you suggest when people like have those epiphany moments of, oh my gosh, I
Mhm.
do have that fear of being alone, or I do have that fear of not being central in their lives because I have been for 20 years or whatever it is.
Yeah.
How do people deal with those moments of, oh, it's really a fear driving this?
We all have fears that are driving it, and once we realize that they're real and we can name them, then we have to ask ourselves if we're willing to work on them. If we're afraid, what do we need in order to feel more secure and more supportive? So if someone is struggling with a fear that I won't have a purpose and I won't have an identity if this is not a part of my life, then that means the next thing that we want to do is we want to really put ourselves in situations where we can practice separating ourselves from that identity or from that behavior. So it's not a cut and dry thing. It's more of a, I need to start to notice when I'm latching on, and then can I delay my response? How can I make small shifts to my response until I realize, okay, that wasn't awful. I still have purpose. I just need to redirect that purpose into other places.
And I had mentioned there were two things. The other thing that came to mind, and this is a small external type of example in my mind that I thought about, was I have a friend
Mhm.
who has, I'll say, used her diagnosis in ways that I'm not sure are particularly helpful, but they're not unhelpful. But had a moment of revelation one time when she was talking to me about her diagnosis. And we both laughed when we realized one thing that she absolutely hates doing around the home is vacuuming. And she
Mm.
noticed that she seems to have a flare every time, like about once a week. And then some family member,
Post-traumatic cleaning disorder. We're gonna make something up new to go in the DSM. I love it.
we laughed when we began to notice that this flare usually happens right around the time that the vacuuming needs to be done. So
Yeah, yeah.
really aware of those patterns, I think was the key
Mhm.
moment for us when we just started laughing like, wow, that I think
Yeah.
we see a pattern there.
So you become aware of the pattern and then you challenge the pattern. And that's the balance to aware, challenge, and then breakthrough.
Aware, challenge, and breakthrough.
Mhm,
Fantastic.
mhm,
Fantastic. Now, one of the things with I love aware, challenge, and breakthrough, and I'm thinking about a time when I had, as in my mind, it was a much bigger flare than it turned out to be. I was catastrophizing one of my
yeah,
first one of my first slide backs. And what was interesting is my doctor at the time mentioned to me, when I first met you, you were down here in this valley, and
mhm,
together we've gotten up here, and you're doing really well, and you've just slid down like a little bit. You're not back down in the valley.
yeah,
And that was really helpful for me to use, not just in the context of my wellness and whether what this flare was about, but it was also helpful in the context of these moments of being aware and not catastrophizing each one of those moments of awareness. Oh my gosh, that's too big. I'll never get through it. That I've always been that way,
yeah.
or some other catastrophe type of
Mhm.
mentality around it.
And really you're describing a mindset that we have to learn to expire and release so that we can open ourselves up to the possibility that something else, another outcome is possible. But the catastrophizing, it's real. It's real from what I call a neurobiological aspect. It's real because we've been conditioned to fear the dynamic and the situation. It's real because we may not be confident in whatever this new area is that we're trying to approach. So I think what we're really being honest about, and I think it's helpful to acknowledge, is that making changes, healing our self-image, reconciling our relationship with our body, with food, with life, it's hard, but it's worth it. And it's not something that has to be approached in a cookie cutter fashion, and it's not something that has to happen overnight. It is intended to be a really gradual step forward. And then all of a sudden we're like, okay, I still don't love this, but it's getting better and it's getting easier, because I can hear as you talk about it now, there may be a little apprehension, but apprehension is better than catastrophizing. So that's progress.
That's right. We were talking to Pamela Sylvan the other night, and one of her things is she likes to give herself little check marks. And as I was talking to her about these little check marks of when we're making changes and really celebrating the moments where we're like, ah, I did
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I ran out and got a pack of little gold stars.
Oh, wow.
I don't know, but it's from my childhood. It's a really good feeling. It
Yeah.
sounds silly to be at my age and have gold stars, but it was a friendly, it's a reminder that has warm feelings for me. Oh, you got a gold
Yeah.
star. So
Yes, you did. You got a gold star. Isn't it funny? I don't know. I think gold stars are great no matter how old you are. We were just all conditioned, and maybe some of that's age, because I don't even know if they use gold stars anymore, but you could give me one in any day and I would be like, oh, thank you.
I
Yeah.
know it's a funny thing. The check mark is nice, but as I was talking to Pamela, I was like, yeah, no. And I went and got myself a packet. You can still find them, guys. And yep, felt good to have my little gold stars here. Now we just have a couple of minutes left. When I get with Dr. Charryse, time gets away from me.
Yes.
What would you like to share? Tell us where to get your book and then any final thoughts.
So I would love to share that you can get the book on Amazon. And yeah, pretty much that's the easiest place to get it. I did not do it on Audible. Always want to put that in there. People ask, because part of it is like a workbook. Like there are some areas where you get to walk through and ask yourself questions about how do you deal with tough memories and emotions, and what ways have you moved forward and made progress away from your traumas. So the tangible part is there. The other piece that I want to just always leave everyone with is better is always possible. And it does not mean that you don't want to be content, but it's just reminding yourself that you're not stuck where you are unless you choose to stay there. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And give us your website. So
So website is www.drcharryse.com, and Charryse is spelled, well, DrCharryse. And then I'm probably most active on Instagram, which is Dr.Charryse_J.
fantastic. And you can find her everywhere too on the social medias, but her
Yes.
Instagram is awesome. She always gives great tips and images with lots of things that we can do and think about. Thank you so much, Dr. Charryse, for sharing some time with us at the beginning of the year here to set us on a really eventful and wonderful track. And everyone, have a great week, whatever your adventures, and join me next week for another brand new episode. Enjoy.